Evelyn Carter didn't like flying. Never had. Not since her first turbulent hop from Birmingham to Chicago back in the 70s when she clutched her church fan the entire flight and whispered psalms under her breath. But at 76, with knees that clicked like loose change and hips that reminded her of every birthday, Evelyn still boarded that plane to San Diego. Why? Because her grandbabies were waiting. Because even at her age, she believed presence mattered more than presence. And because for Black women like her, showing up has always been the first act of resistance. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. She had just spent 10 days in a whirlwind of bedtime stories, sticky fingers, and pancake mornings. She let the little ones climb over her like a jungle gym, let them braid her gray curls into crooked lines, and when they hugged her at the terminal, they held on too long. Her daughter, Vanessa, always precise, always on the clock, had already returned to Charlotte for meetings. Evelyn wasn't in a rush. Her connecting flight through Phoenix would get her home by nightfall, home to her porch swing, her blooming magnolias, and the quiet. But peace has a strange way of slipping away when you're a Black woman in America. At Gate B-27, Evelyn moved slowly down the jet bridge, gripping the railing with one hand and pulling her floral carry-on with the other. She wore soft beige slacks, a lavender sweater draped over her shoulders, and those orthopedic shoes her daughter teased her about. A silk scarf wrapped around her head just right. She had always believed that dignity started with being put together, even if nobody seemed to look twice anymore. The flight attendant at the cabin door didn't smile long, just enough to glance past her to the younger couple behind. Evelyn didn't mind. Being overlooked wasn't new. She was used to becoming invisible the moment she got quiet. Seat 14, C aisle. She preferred the aisle for easier access, less trouble. She slid her bag under the seat, folded her cardigan across her lap, and settled in. The plane was about half full. A few murmurs, the occasional zipper, the hiss of air vents overhead. She looked out the window, remembering her grandson's tiny hand refusing to let go at the gate. She smiled, then closed her eyes. The calm didn't last. Before the safety demonstration even began, she heard it, the deliberate, heavy footfalls of two security agents walking down the narrow aisle. At first, she thought they were headed for someone else. Surely, someone had caused a stir behind her. Maybe a mix-up with seating, or someone who refused to mask up. But when they stopped at her row and leaned in, her stomach sank. "Ma'am," the taller one said quietly, "we need you to come with us." Evelyn blinked. "Me?" "Yes, ma'am. Please gather your things." Her hands went cold. She looked toward the flight attendant. Surely there'd been a mistake. But the woman looked away, avoided her eyes. The other passengers? Silent, curious, watching, whispering. Not one of them asked what was going on. "Can I ask why?" Evelyn said, voice steady despite the tremble building in her chest. "There was a concern," one officer replied. The flight crew felt uneasy. Uneasy. That word hit her like cold water. She hadn't said a thing. Hadn't asked for anything. Hadn't even reclined her seat. She had simply existed as an elderly Black woman in her seat, wrapped in quiet. And somehow, that had become enough to be flagged, removed, erased. She gathered her sweater, her purse, moved with care, spine straight, head high. If they were going to drag her into a moment of shame, she'd refuse to carry it for them. As she walked down the aisle, the murmurs followed. She passed the same people who had nodded politely minutes ago, now watching her like she'd broken some sacred rule. Oh, nobody asked what she did. Nobody asked if she was okay. They just looked away. Back at the gate, they made her sit. A young agent, barely out of college, mumbled that her behavior had been irregular. Evelyn had boarded, sat quietly, and hadn't even asked for water. But in the eyes of one young flight attendant, that was somehow off. The plane left without her. Evelyn sat there, abandoned and bewildered with no answers. But 2,000 miles away, her daughter Vanessa, mid-stride in a multi-billion-dollar negotiation, was about to answer for her. Not with anger, not with a press release, but with the one language corporate America never ignores: money. And before the day was done, the entire country would know the name Evelyn Carter. Not because she made a scene, but because she never needed to. The chill inside the airport terminal had followed Evelyn Carter onto the plane. She had pulled her lavender cardigan tighter across her lap, crossed her ankles neatly, and folded her hands, like she had 100 Sundays in church pews. Flight 482 was supposed to be an ordinary hop from Phoenix to Birmingham, a 2-hour stretch across clear skies. Nothing more. She had done everything right. Boarded quietly, found her seat, didn't block the aisle, didn't grumble or groan about overhead bin space, didn't even ask the young man beside her to switch seats, even though the window was always her favorite. No, Evelyn had sat in 14C like she was taught to, gracious, composed, unbothered. It was the kind of presence she had spent a lifetime perfecting. And still, it wasn't enough. She noticed the change before the others did. A sudden hush in the rows behind her. A ripple of movement. From the corner of her eye, 2 uniformed agents stepped into the cabin and began walking down the aisle. Not briskly, not with urgency, slowly, deliberately, their expressions unreadable, their posture rehearsed. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had raised 3 children and buried 1. She had sat through deacons' meetings that went 4 hours past respectful, and endured doctors who spoke about her body like she wasn't in the room. She had walked through stores where security guards followed her, but never asked if she needed help. She had survived worse than this. So when they stopped at her row, she didn't panic. Not at first. "Ma'am," the taller one said, dipping his voice so only she could hear. "We need you to come with us." Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry?" "We've been asked to escort you off the plane." Evelyn blinked. "Is there a mistake? What's going on?" "That's all I'm allowed to say." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer any comfort either. Just that same measured tone, like someone reciting policy from a laminated card. She turned to the flight attendant a few feet away, a young woman with a sleek blonde ponytail and a sharp, practiced smile, the kind of woman Evelyn might have once taught Sunday school to. But she wasn't looking at Evelyn. She was looking past her, out the window, as though she didn't hear a thing. Evelyn's voice remained level. "Is there a problem with my seat?" No answer. The other passengers began to whisper. Someone across the aisle leaned slightly to listen. A child peeked through the gap in the seat backs. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. She had no intention of giving them a reason to justify this. She reached down, slowly, for her purse. Her hands trembled. She stood, carefully, deliberately. The cardigan fell from her lap and draped over one arm. As she stepped into the aisle, her shoes made soft squeaks against the rubber floor. Her knees ached, but she didn't wince. She would not give them that. She walked the length of the cabin in silence, past rows of eyes that darted away the second she met them. No one asked if she was okay. No one stood, no one spoke. Back at the gate, a young woman, barely older than her oldest granddaughter, gestured toward a hard vinyl chair against the wall. Evelyn sat. A gate agent stepped forward, tablet in hand, eyes flicking up and down the screen. There was Concern, she said, avoiding Evelyn's eyes. The crew didn't feel comfortable. Evelyn narrowed her gaze. Comfortable? Yes, ma'am. They said your behavior was irregular. I boarded? Evelyn replied slowly, measuring her words like marbles in her mouth. I sat. I didn't even ask for a drink. You'll have to explain to me what part of that was irregular. The agent's cheeks flushed. I'm just relaying the information, ma'am. Evelyn turned her head toward the wide window. Outside, the plane she had been on was already pushing back from the gate. They hadn't even waited to explain. No threats, no shouting, no seat dispute. Just removed. Quietly, completely. As if her presence itself had been the disturbance. She didn't cry, didn't raise her voice, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She clutched them tightly in her lap, willing them still. She'd always known this country saw people like her through a different lens, but at 76 she hadn't expected to be treated like a risk simply for sitting still. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was Vanessa. Evelyn answered with a voice steadier than she felt. I'm fine, she said, before her daughter could speak. But they pulled me off the plane. A pause. What do you mean they pulled you? Vanessa's voice, sharp and honed from boardrooms, lost its edge for the first time in years. They said I made someone uncomfortable. That word again, uncomfortable. As if discomfort was a reason to upend someone's travel, their dignity, their sense of self. I didn't do anything, Vanessa, Evelyn whispered, the weight of the moment finally pressing on her ribs. I just sat there. Don't move, Vanessa said. I'm calling you back in 5. But Evelyn already knew what her daughter was going to do. Because while Evelyn had survived decades of being quiet, Vanessa had spent her life learning when not to be. A few seats away, someone had been watching. A young black woman in a gray hoodie stepped over, cautious but direct. Ma'am, I saw what happened. That wasn't right. Evelyn turned to her, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. I recorded it, the woman said, holding up her phone. Didn't catch the whole thing, but I got you walking off. No yelling, no fuss, just wrong. Evelyn nodded, unsure how to respond. Gratitude and humiliation mixed in her throat. The young woman smiled faintly. My name's Aaliyah. I already posted it. No names, just what happened. Evelyn didn't know what that meant. Social media wasn't her world. But she understood one thing. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared enough to watch and remember. The phone rang again. Vanessa. They said your behavior made someone feel uneasy, she said, her voice clipped and low. And that's all they'll say. I wasn't doing anything, baby, Evelyn said, just breathing. I know, Mama. Stay where you are. You're not getting back on their plane. Evelyn didn't argue. She felt like a stone dropped into deep water. Still, on the surface. Heavy underneath. Aaliyah refreshed her phone. 20,000 views already, she murmured. People are pissed. Some are tagging the airline. One person said they recognized you from the church food drive. Evelyn blinked. From back home? Yep, said you used to run the reading program in East Birmingham. She smiled for the first time since her removal. That was years ago. Doesn't matter, you matter, and folks are watching now. The camera hadn't lied. And this time, Evelyn wasn't alone. Across the country, in a glass-walled conference room in Charlotte, Vanessa had just stepped out of a meeting and dialed a direct number, the CEO of Sky Delta Airlines. By the time the airline even realized who they'd pulled off that plane, the ink on their $5 billion deal with Vanessa's company hadn't yet dried, but it never would. Because as Vanessa would soon tell him, this wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. And the cost of dismissing Evelyn Carter, quiet, polite, forgettable to some, was about to be felt in the only language the airline executives truly understood: loss. Loss of trust. Loss of reputation. Loss of $5 billion. All because a flight attendant thought an elderly black woman sitting quietly in 14C made her uneasy. Evelyn Carter didn't shout. She didn't curse, didn't protest. She just stood up and walked off the plane. But her walk was the first step in a reckoning far louder than any headline. Aaliyah Thomas hadn't planned to become anyone's voice that morning. She was just another traveler with a delayed boarding pass, slumped across from gate B27, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. Dressed in gray joggers, a hoodie that had seen better days, and sneakers scuffed from city sidewalks, she blended into the Phoenix terminal like any other college graduate still figuring things out. She wasn't a journalist, she wasn't an activist. She was tired. Tired of layovers, tired of the noise, tired of a world that expected black women to carry weight in silence. But when she saw her, the older lady in the lavender cardigan, calm and still, being escorted off the plane, something inside her snapped into focus. At first, she thought there must have been some mix-up. Maybe the airline had overbooked. Maybe it was medical. But when the woman, Evelyn Carter, she would learn later, rose slowly from her seat and walked the aisle like she was trying not to break, Aaliyah's hands reached for her phone. Not to stir drama, not to go viral, but because she knew what it meant to be unseen, and she knew what it looked like when someone was being erased. She hit record. The video captured Evelyn's slow, measured steps, her dignity, her quiet. No shouting, no resistance, just a woman walking, surrounded by silence so thick it could bruise. Aaliyah's voice didn't appear in the clip. She stayed seated, filming discreetly, heart pounding. When Evelyn passed by, she met Aaliyah's eyes for half a second. In that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not fear, something deeper. Recognition. Aaliyah didn't stop recording until the plane doors closed, and then she got angry. Not the kind of loud, reckless anger that burns fast and fades. The slow-boiling kind. The kind passed down from grandmothers who scrubbed floors and smiled through insult. Mothers who taught their daughters how to survive in rooms that wanted them invisible. She uploaded the clip to her account. Nothing fancy. Just the raw footage with a simple caption. This woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't break any rules. She just sat in her seat and got removed. For making someone uncomfortable. She didn't name Evelyn. Didn't say what airline. But the airport code was visible, and the faces were clear enough. Within 15 minutes, the video hit 2,000 views. Within an hour, 18,000, then 50,000. By the time the flight had landed in Birmingham, without Evelyn, her name was trending on Twitter. Aaliyah didn't realize how fast it would snowball. At first, it was the comments. She reminds me of my mom. That could have been my aunt. This is still happening? Which airline? Then came the tags: Delta Horizon, Phoenix Airport, FAA, NAACP, journalists, influencers. The digital fire had started, and Aaliyah was standing at the spark point. She refreshed her feed again and again, watching the views tick up like a heartbeat. One message popped up from a stranger. She looks like Mrs. Carter from Birmingham. She ran the church literacy program, right? Aaliyah blinked. Her chest tightened. So this woman wasn't just someone's grandma. She was somebody. The kind of quiet somebody who didn't need attention because her work had already spoken for her. And now the world was listening. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in the terminal, back stiff, phone in her lap. She hadn't asked what a trending video was. She hadn't asked why strangers were suddenly whispering and watching. She only knew one thing for sure. Her daughter was handling it. Vanessa had called her again. "They know, Mama. People are watching. You did nothing wrong, and I've already pulled the deal." Evelyn had nodded, unsure what to say. She hadn't set out to make a point. She had just wanted to go home. Aaliyah hesitated for nearly 10 minutes before walking over to Evelyn's seat. She didn't want to intrude. She didn't want to embarrass her. But more than anything, she didn't want her to feel alone. She sat one chair away, leaned forward gently, and said, "Ma'am, I just want to say I'm sorry. What they did, it wasn't right." Evelyn turned to her surprised, then softened. "Thank you," she replied, her voice quiet but clear. "I recorded it," Aaliyah added, raising her phone slightly. "I didn't know what was happening, but it didn't sit right. You weren't yelling. You weren't doing anything. You just sat there." "I didn't even stand up," Evelyn said, almost to herself. "No, ma'am, and still." They sat in silence for a beat. "My name's Aaliyah." "I'm Evelyn." "I posted it, didn't say your name, just what I saw." Evelyn nodded. "I appreciate that." "They're talking about it. People are outraged. I'm not sure how I feel about that." Aaliyah smiled sadly. "You don't have to do anything. You've already done enough." By that afternoon, national news outlets had picked up the story. Cable networks were airing the footage with headlines like, "Elderly Black Woman Removed from Flight Without Explanation." Passenger claims she was deemed uncomfortable by crew and escorted out. CEO's mother removed from plane, $5 billion deal pulled in response. The last one caught Aaliyah's breath when she saw it. CEO? She clicked deeper. Vanessa Carter Whitman, founder and managing partner of Whitman Equity Group. Powerhouse, trailblazer, negotiating a $5 billion infrastructure investment with the same airline that had just quietly removed her mother. Suddenly, the pieces snapped together. The daughter was the storm. But Evelyn was the center of it, and still. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't demanded a statement. She just existed. And that had been enough to trigger the very systems that claimed to serve her. Aaliyah's video passed 1 million views by evening. Her inbox exploded with requests for interviews, reposts, speaking on panels. One media company offered $500 for exclusive rights. She didn't answer. This wasn't a business opportunity. It was someone's mother. She messaged Vanessa directly instead. She wasn't even sure she'd see it. "Hi, my name's Aaliyah Thomas. I recorded your mom's removal from the flight this morning. I've posted it anonymously, but if there's anything you want me to take down or say, I'll do whatever you need." Vanessa replied 5 minutes later, "Thank you. Please don't delete it. We're not hiding anything. Let the world see." Aaliyah stared at the message, then at the screen. So this was it. She hadn't meant to be involved, but now she was. She wasn't the story. Evelyn was. But in that moment, she understood something she'd never quite believed before. Being a witness isn't passive. It's a responsibility. It's knowing what you saw and choosing not to look away. That night, she walked into a local cafe still open near the airport and sat alone with her thoughts. She scrolled through the hundreds of comments piling in, one after another. "My mother's 75. She flies every year to visit us." What if this had been her? This is what systemic bias looks like. It's not screaming. It's quiet erasure. "We're with you, Miss Evelyn. Shame on that airline. This video broke my heart." Aaliyah turned off her screen and pressed her hand to her chest. She thought of her own grandmother, gone now nearly 7 years, who had marched for voting rights but never once raised her voice in public. who had taught her that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you wear, even when no one sees it. Evelyn Carter had worn hers like armor, and Aaliyah had seen it, and she had shown the world. Across the country, in a corner office high above Charlotte, Vanessa stood alone, watching the city lights stretch out like a grid of opportunity and consequence. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Aaliyah simply reading, 1.2 million views. People are asking for her name. I didn't share it, but someone will. Vanessa typed back, thank you, keep the original up, we're not hiding. They thought this would stay quiet. They were wrong. And in that moment, halfway between heartbreak and strategy, the two women understood one another completely. They didn't need headlines. They had truth, and the courage to tell it. Vanessa Carter Whitman didn't slam doors. She didn't scream into phones or threaten lawsuits. That wasn't her style. She had learned long ago, growing up in a neighborhood where justice took its time, if it came at all, that silence could be just as loud, especially when it came wrapped in influence. But when her mother, Evelyn Carter, told her they had been removed from a flight for making someone uneasy, something deep in Vanessa's spine locked into place. A cold, steady resolve, the kind that doesn't rattle, it recalibrates. She ended the call and stood in the corner of the executive boardroom at Whitman Equity Group's headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath the late afternoon haze. Inside, the tension was growing. The room was still buzzing from the earlier strategic planning session. Just 2 days ago, Vanessa had finalized a landmark $5 billion infrastructure deal with the Delta Horizon Airlines, a long-term investment spanning fleet upgrades, sustainability tech, and rural route expansion. It had taken months to draft, a year to negotiate, and now it didn't matter. Vanessa reached for her phone and dialed her chief of communications. Kayla, she said, her voice low and level. I need a clean, full breakdown of our investment with Delta Horizon. Clauses, redirect options, everything. There was a pause. What happened? They pulled my mother off one of their planes. No reason, no warning. Just said she made someone uncomfortable. Kayla didn't speak for a moment. Then, 10 minutes, you'll have it. Vanessa hung up. She didn't pace. She didn't vent. She sat back in her chair, opened her laptop, and began reviewing the original contract. But her thoughts weren't on spreadsheets. They were on the way her mother had sounded on the phone. Steady, proud, but tired in a way that didn't come from jet lag. Tired in a way that came from decades of knowing you didn't quite belong in spaces you'd earned the right to be in. It wasn't about the seat, it wasn't about the plane. It was about how quickly her mother had been made disposable, and how expensive that mistake was about to become. The CEO of Delta Horizon, Alan Trask, was in his office in Mesa, Arizona, when his direct line rang. He glanced at the name, Vanessa Carter Whitman. He sat up, suddenly alert. Vanessa, he said, smoothing his voice into its usual polished tone. Good to hear from you. Everything on track for next week's signing? No, Vanessa said. I'm calling to inform you that Whitman Equity Group will be terminating our agreement, effective immediately. There was a pause. Then, I'm sorry. What? I said we're pulling out. The deal is off. Vanessa, that's $5 billion in capital. I'm aware. Can I ask, why? One of your flight attendants had my 76-year-old mother removed from a flight today. No violation, no incident, just her presence. She boarded, sat quietly, caused no disruption. But a crew member claimed she was irregular, said she made them uncomfortable. Alan's voice, previously casual, now tightened. I hadn't heard. You will, she interrupted. You'll have full details in writing within the hour. And just so you know, we've already had interest from your competitors. I'm not bluffing, Alan. I'm done. Vanessa, this isn't how we do business. You're right. It's how you do people. She ended the call without waiting for a reply. And with that, $5 billion vanished from Delta Horizon's future in under 5 minutes. Across the room, Vanessa's assistant knocked gently. "Ma'am," she said, "there's already press pickup on the video from the Phoenix airport. It's climbing. Let it. We've also been contacted by Skyfront Airlines. Their rep says they've heard about the termination." Vanessa looked up. "Put them on the call list for tomorrow." The assistant nodded, then hesitated. "Is there anything else I should say?" Vanessa smiled, just slightly. "Just tell them we value integrity." Back at the Phoenix terminal, Evelyn was now under the care of a transportation liaison named Sonia Greer, a former federal investigator who now managed high-level executive logistics. Dressed in a charcoal blazer and a silver airport badge that made TSA officers stand a little straighter, Sonia approached Evelyn with measured warmth. "Miss Carter," she said gently, "I'm here on behalf of your daughter. We're going to get you somewhere more comfortable." Evelyn stood slowly. "I don't know what all this is, but I trust my daughter knows what she's doing." Sonia gave a faint knowing smile. "Oh, she does. And a lot of people are about to learn it too." As they exited the terminal, a local reporter tried to approach. Sonia stepped in front. "No comment at this time," she said, shielding Evelyn without raising her voice. Evelyn didn't look angry. She looked forward, clear-eyed, focused, like a woman who had stopped waiting for the world to do the right thing and had chosen to carry herself like it already had. Meanwhile, Delta Horizon's crisis control room was already heating up. Alan Trask slammed the receiver down and stared out the window. Across from him, the company's general counsel, Gwen Sanderson, flipped through a report. "She pulled the deal? No warning, just gone. Because of a crew complaint?" Alan nodded. "They pulled her mother off a plane. One flight attendant said she was a staring." "Not blinking much, that's it." Gwen's jaw tightened. "That's not a violation," she said. "That's bias with a clipboard. PR will need to handle this, draft something." "It's too late for that," Gwen said flatly. "The deal's already void, and if she speaks out publicly—" "She hasn't," Alan said. "Not yet. She doesn't need to. The public's connecting the dots. Her mother was treated like a threat for sitting still, and her daughter just cost us $5 billion because of it." Vanessa hadn't spoken to the press. She hadn't posted a single comment. She didn't need to. Her silence had already become its own language, the kind that spoke in market dips and pulled investments, the kind that didn't shout, but moved entire companies into crisis mode. Back at home in Charlotte, Vanessa sat on her back porch that evening, watching the sunset behind the tall pines. Her laptop sat open next to her, but she wasn't typing. She was reading the transcript of the flight incident report. 3 times the words appeared. Irregular behavior. Each time vaguer than the last. No yelling, no movement, no request, just seemed off. That was how they wrote her mother out of a seat she had paid for. That's what years of training and procedure boiled down to, gut feelings cloaked in policy. Her phone buzzed. It was her husband Terrence coming out with 2 mugs of tea. "You made the right call," he said, handing her the cup. "She doesn't care about the money," Vanessa replied, "but I do. Because money is how they listen." "You just told them." Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't need to. The story was already moving without her. The press, the public, the silent majority who had watched similar things happen to someone they loved and never had the power to stop it. They were speaking now. But it wasn't just about Evelyn anymore. It was about every woman who had ever been dismissed with a smile, every mother removed politely, every black elder disrespected just enough to be forgotten. Not this time, not quietly, not without consequence. By the end of that week, Skyfront Airlines confirmed a new $5 billion partnership with Whitman Equity Group. They didn't announce it with flair, just a quiet press release. But the subtext was clear. Vanessa Carter Whitman hadn't just pulled out of one deal, she had rewritten the rules. And Evelyn Carter, dignified, composed, still sipping tea under her daughter's porch light, had become the quiet reason why. At precisely 6:37 a.m. the next morning, the boardroom at Delta Horizon's Mesa headquarters was packed. Notebooks open, coffee bitter, tension thick. No one wanted to say it aloud, but everyone in the room knew they were no longer managing a minor PR mishap. This wasn't turbulence, it was a free fall. At the head of the table, Alan Trask, CEO, paced with his blazer folded over one arm, his tie loosened and eyes bloodshot. The phones hadn't stopped ringing since 9 p.m. the night before. Legal, investors, media, and most damning of all, the board, all wanted the same thing: answers. "Let's be clear," Alan said, his voice sharper than usual. "We didn't lose $5 billion over a screaming match. We lost it over a woman sitting quietly in her seat. That's what we're cleaning up today." Across from him, Gwen Sanderson, head of legal, slid a manila folder across the table. She'd barely slept. Her team had worked overnight compiling every document, every crew statement, and every available security timestamp from Flight 482. "We reviewed everything," she said. "Boarding logs, seating charts, crew logs. There was no disturbance, no verbal altercation, no safety violation." She opened the folder and let the silence thicken before continuing. The only justification provided was that Ms. Carter's behavior was irregular. The crew reported she was too quiet, didn't blink much, didn't engage with the flight attendant. A cough broke the silence. One of the board members, a man named Stuart Lang, removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We're talking about a 76-year-old woman," he muttered. "Not a terrorist." Another voice chimed in from the far end of the table. Cynthia Wu, Vice President of International Development, shook her head. "How did we not know who she was?" "She didn't fly under her daughter's name," Gwen replied. "No assistant. No notes in the system. No flagged priority account. She flew like anyone else." "Maybe that's part of the problem," Cynthia said. "We're trained to recognize high-value clients by the way they dress, the titles they carry, or how loud they are in the lounge. She didn't fit the profile, so no one looked deeper." Alan exhaled, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We need to get ahead of this." "It's too late to get ahead of it," Gwen said flatly. "This isn't just a business issue. It's cultural. It's optics. The public has already decided what this looks like, and they're not wrong." The company's chief communications officer, Leon Baxter, tapped his tablet. "The video has crossed 10 million views. Overnight." A low murmur spread across the table. Leon continued. "Our brand is being dragged across every major platform: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, even TikTok. Hashtags are trending. Flying while black, Evelyn Carter, Delta disrespect." "And what about Vanessa Carter Whitman?" Alan asked. "Has she spoken publicly?" "Not yet," Leon said. "But that's the worst part. She hasn't said a word, and she doesn't have to." "Why?" "Because the silence speaks louder." She pulled the deal. Her silence implies intention, clarity, strategy. Everyone's filling in the blanks. Alan sat back down. His voice dropped an octave. "We need to make a statement, full apology, total transparency." Gwen leaned forward. "Too little, too late. You want my legal advice?" "Always." "We're not going to spin this with a press release. We need to take responsibility, internally and externally. That means accountability, not just an apology. Action. And who do we hold accountable? Alan asked, though he already knew. 10 minutes later, Cheryl Metz was escorted into the room. The flight attendant, blonde ponytail, pressed uniform, shoulders tight with nerves. She stood stiffly by the door, clutching her lanyard. "Ms. Metz," Alan began, "walk us through your decision." Cheryl hesitated, her eyes darting between the faces around the table. Older, colder, sharper than the HR manager she'd spoken to the day before. "I was in the front galley. I saw Ms. Carter board. Nothing seemed wrong at first, but later I noticed she was just sitting there, staring, not blinking much. It felt off." "Did she speak to you?" Gwen asked. "No, ma'am, that's the thing. She didn't say anything, didn't ask for water. Most passengers, well, they engage." "So she was quiet," Gwen said. "That's it?" Cheryl swallowed. "I followed protocol. I flagged it to the captain. He approved the removal. Did she argue, raise her voice, move erratically?" "No." "Did you feel threatened?" "No," Cheryl said. "But with everything going on these days, I thought it was safer." That word again. "Safer," Gwen repeated. "That's what we're calling this now?" Leon looked up. "You removed a black elder from a plane because she didn't make eye contact." "I didn't mean—" "But that's what happened," Gwen said, cutting her off. "And now this airline is being seen not just as careless, but as biased." Alan raised a hand, signaling the conversation was over. "Ms. Metz, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately." Cheryl's face drained of color. "Wait, I did what I was trained to do." "You exercised poor judgment," Gwen said, "and now we're all paying for it." She was escorted out without further word. The room sat in stunned silence. No one cheered, no one gloated. Because the truth had settled in heavy. They hadn't lost a deal because Evelyn Carter was important. They'd lost it because they had treated her as if she wasn't. Across town, in her Charlotte office, Vanessa sat with her legs crossed, staring at her inbox. New emails arrived by the second. Subject lines: "Can we talk? Any chance we revisit the agreement? Your silence is making a statement. Skyfront is calling you a visionary." She ignored them all. Instead, she opened the public statement released by Delta Horizon that morning. "We regret the events that took place involving Ms. Carter on Flight 482. While our crew followed standard safety procedures, we acknowledge that the experience fell short of our values. We are conducting a full internal review and are committed to doing better." Vanessa read it once, then closed the window. Too polished, too vague, still protecting themselves, still missing the point. At her mother's house, Evelyn sat on the porch with her robe drawn tight and a warm mug in her lap. Her son, Julius, had stopped by with pound cake and news updates. "You're on TV again," he said, laughing nervously. "I didn't ask for all this," Evelyn replied, shaking her head. "You didn't ask for what happened either." "That's true." A moment passed between them, filled only by the sound of cicadas and the clink of Evelyn's spoon against her mug. "I just wanted to get home," she said. "I didn't want to become a symbol." Julius looked at her. "But you didn't shout. And they still made you leave. That's why it matters." Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to. Inside Delta Horizon's investor relations office, the phones rang like alarms. By midday, the company's stock had dipped sharply, analysts citing leadership instability and public trust erosion. No one cared that the board was holding emergency sessions. No one cared that Cheryl Metz had been placed on leave. The market wasn't reacting to what the company said. It was reacting to what it didn't. and in a world that now moves at the speed of outrage, Delta Horizon was learning the hard way. When dignity is discarded, so is your bottom line. Back in Charlotte, Vanessa stood in front of a room full of young associates at Whitman Equity Group. Most were first-generation college graduates, black, brown, women, quiet, careful. They had watched the news, read the posts, felt the shift. Vanessa didn't give them a speech. She gave them a sentence. She didn't yell, she said, voice soft. She didn't make a scene, and they still removed her. She paused, not because she was dangerous, but because someone felt something. She looked at each of them. That's what bias looks like when it's wearing a uniform. And they all understood. Not because she explained it perfectly, but because, like the rest of the country, they had already seen it. By Friday morning, Evelyn Carter had become a household name. Not because she campaigned for it, not because she made a scene, but because she didn't. She became known not for what she did, but for what she represented. A black grandmother quietly removed from a plane because her stillness was seen as suspicious, and because one flight attendant's gut feeling outweighed Evelyn's right to sit in peace. And because her daughter, Vanessa Carter Whitman, CEO of Whitman Equity Group, decided to speak not in press releases or hashtags, but in capital. Her silence had already started a storm. Now that storm had a name. By noon, news anchors were calling Evelyn the dignified grandmother. Editorials described her as a modern-day Rosa Parks in orthopedic shoes. People across the country were quoting her quiet, firm line from the terminal security video. "I didn't even ask for water." That sentence echoed louder than any protest chant. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even defiant. It was the sound of a woman whose presence had been misinterpreted, mislabeled, and removed, without apology. And it broke something wide open. In Montgomery, Alabama, Evelyn's hometown, local churches held prayer circles in her name. At New Zion Baptist, Reverend Otis Daniels stood before his congregation and said, "If a woman like Evelyn Carter, who served her community, fed the hungry, taught our children, can't sit on a plane without suspicion, then none of us are truly safe." The crowd nodded in agreement. Some wept, some shouted, "Amen." All felt the truth deep in their bones. The Reverend's statement was picked up by a regional station. Within hours, it had been rebroadcast on national television. Commentators played the clip beside footage of Evelyn walking calmly off Flight 482. The contrast was striking, her soft presence beside the growing noise of public outcry. At the same time, Kiara, the young woman who had filmed the original video in Phoenix, was being interviewed on national radio. Her voice cracked slightly as she described what she saw. She didn't argue, she didn't even speak, she just looked confused. And then she stood up, holding her sweater like it was the last thing keeping her from breaking. That's what made me pull my phone out. Not because she was loud, but because she was so quiet and it felt wrong. When the host asked what compelled her to post the video, Kiara replied, "Because silence doesn't always protect us. But bearing witness, that's something I could do." Her interview went viral within hours. Followers flooded her inbox. Reporters begged for follow-ups. She turned down every offer to monetize the moment. Instead, she launched a digital page titled Insight in Heard. A collection of personal stories from people, mostly black elders, who'd experienced quiet discrimination in places meant to be neutral. Grocery stores, waiting rooms, airports. She wasn't trying to start a movement, but one had started anyway. By Saturday, Delta Horizon had entered crisis stage. Their second public statement was longer, apologetic, polished to the point of parody. "We recognize that our initial response fell short. We deeply regret the experience Ms. Carter endured and are implementing immediate internal reviews and retraining programs to ensure our values align with our actions." Vanessa read it over coffee. She didn't flinch, didn't reply, didn't post. Instead, she forwarded the statement to her legal team with a single note. Too late. Back at her home in Charlotte, Evelyn was sitting on the porch with her robe drawn around her and a wool blanket draped over her knees. She hadn't turned on the television. She didn't need to. Her mailbox had done it for her. Handwritten letters, cards from strangers, a watercolor painting of her walking through the terminal, head high, eyes forward, signed by a fifth-grade class in Kansas, and one envelope from Skyfront Airlines. Inside was a short note on crisp stationery. "We see you, and we'd be honored to fly you whenever and wherever you choose." She tucked it into her Bible, not because she wanted to cash it in, but because it reminded her people were still watching, and some of them were learning. On Sunday, Evelyn and Vanessa boarded a small private jet chartered by Skyfront. Not for luxury, not for show, but because they'd been invited to Kansas City, where a group of young black women in aviation training had asked to meet Evelyn. They had seen her video, followed her story, and wanted to honor her. At the small airfield, a group of women stood in navy blue jumpsuits, clutching flowers, their eyes wide, their postures straight. When Evelyn stepped off the plane, they broke into soft applause. One of them, a tall young woman named Ashanti Rivers, stepped forward and extended her hand. "Miss Carter," she said, "you made us feel visible." "Thank you." Evelyn took her hand, surprised. "I didn't do anything special." Ashanti smiled. "You didn't shout, you just stood there. And that was enough for the world to see something it usually ignores." Vanessa stood off to the side, hands in her pockets, eyes misted. She didn't step in. This wasn't her moment, it never really had been. That evening, Vanessa received a call from a rival airline executive who had been tracking the fallout. "We heard you pulled the Delta Horizon deal," he said cautiously. "Any chance we talk tomorrow?" Vanessa replied calmly. "We'll see. Right now, I'm busy with something more important than business." And she meant it. Because something was shifting. Bigger than her portfolio, bigger than her company's image. This wasn't just a market correction. It was a moral recalibration. In New York, Chicago, Atlanta, conversations were happening at dinner tables, in university classrooms, in corporate DEI committees. Questions that had long been dismissed were now front and center. Who gets to define safety? Who decides what irregular looks like? And how many quiet harms go unspoken simply because no one's watching? But this time, someone had watched, and someone had recorded it, and someone with power had decided that the cost of ignoring it was too high. That's what made it different. Not the incident itself, those happen far too often, but the response. By Monday, one midsize airline launched a scholarship in Evelyn's name for older women pursuing late-stage careers in aviation. Vanessa laughed when she saw the announcement. "You barely passed algebra," she teased. Evelyn chuckled, "But I made it through life, and apparently that counts more." They sipped tea on the porch that night, the autumn air curling around their ankles. "They're still talking about you," Vanessa said. "I'm not running for office. That's why they believe you." They didn't say much more. They didn't need to. Because the quiet between them wasn't empty. It was earned. And inside the high-rise offices of Delta Horizon, the tone had changed. No one was arguing over procedure anymore. No one was drafting soft language. They were, for the first time, reviewing how they made decisions. Not just what the rulebook said, but what it allowed them to ignore. Their internal training manuals were being rewritten. Their senior diversity officer had called for an independent audit. They'd lost $5 billion, yes. But what stung more, what kept them up at night, was that they'd lost the trust of the public without ever being given the chance to speak. Because this time, the public had already drawn the conclusion. And the verdict wasn't just about Evelyn Carter. It was about every quiet injustice that had been swallowed for the sake of politeness. Every seat that had been taken away without cause. Every silence that had been mistaken for consent. Vanessa stood at the front of her company's executive roundtable that Friday morning and said, they thought removing her would go unnoticed, that she was forgettable, just another boarding pass. She let the words hang there for a moment, but they forgot something. My mother isn't loud, but she's not invisible. That line would later appear on a billboard in Times Square, sponsored not by her firm, but by a community action group who had seen themselves in Evelyn. Not because they had experienced the exact same thing, but because they could feel how easily they could have. A week after returning home, Evelyn Carter walked through the automatic doors of her neighborhood grocery store. The same checker waved, the same security guard nodded. But something was different now. Strangers whispered, then smiled. One young man quietly paid for her coffee at the counter and slipped away without a word. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and said, "That's the lady from the video." But Evelyn didn't feel like a symbol. She didn't feel famous. She felt like a woman who'd simply held her ground when the world tried to make her disappear. That, it turned out, was enough. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't marched, she hadn't demanded anything. She had just refused to be erased. Vanessa, back at work, finalized a new deal with the Skyfront Airlines. Stocks rose. Analysts called it a values-based pivot. But inside Whitman Equity Group, her team just called it the shift. A shift in how they chose their partners. A shift in how silence was no longer neutral. It was complicity. And at a university in Oregon, a young professor showed Evelyn's interview to her class on media ethics. One student said the video reminded her of her grandmother. Another broke down in tears. Not because Evelyn had demanded sympathy, but because she carried herself with a quiet strength that couldn't be ignored. Back in Birmingham, Evelyn stood at her porch door one night. No reporters, no cameras. Just the porch light off, and the quiet hum of her neighborhood. She breathed deep. She had not set out to make a statement. She had simply done what too many are told not to, sit still and exist without apology. What began with a flight ended with a reckoning. Not just for an airline, but for a culture. Because the lesson wasn't just for executives in glass towers. It was for all of us. Never assume the worth of the person in seat 14C. Never forget the dignity in stillness, and never, ever mistake silence for weakness. Some stories start with protest. Others begin with a question no one wants to answer. Is it because I'm black? And when that question hangs in the air unanswered, it echoes. Through boardrooms, through living rooms, through the conscience of a country that still has far to go. Evelyn Carter didn't ask for attention. She asked for dignity. And by refusing to shrink, she gave the rest of us a path to follow. If this story moved you, or reminded you of someone you love, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you believe quiet strength can change the world. And make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the real stories that need to be heard. From powerful voices to everyday heroes, we're telling the truth one story at a time. What would you have done if Evelyn was your mother, your neighbor, or even you? Let's talk about it below.